And I said, honey, if you think that's nice, drop the soap and I'll tell a lie. Oh, hold on, I gotta go. Sorry about that, I didn't see you there. How are you doing today? Welcome back to another Cold Blood and Cocktails. As you beautiful people know, any tip you may have, please cast it away because this is a channel of positive energy, okay? Thank you. Oh, my little nostril pickers, how you doing today? I hope wherever you're at in the world you're having a spectacular day so far. Yes, ma'am. And I'm sure you're dying to know why am I dressed as Pinocchio? Well, that's because today's story features a big liar. If he were actually Pinocchio, he'd have a pool cue for a nose by the end of his life. But yeah, maybe you've heard of today's case. It was a cold case for a long time, and then after like 30 years, it was finally solved. Well, kind of solved. I don't know. I'm still not fully convinced. Once we're at the end of this little shit show, you'll have to let me know down in the comments below what you think. But before we dive our little asses right into the story, let's talk about today's cocktail. I was gonna try to make it blue, but I didn't. Today we have a very simple drink. It's peach schnapps with some mango juice and a little bit of pineapple juice. Oh, I haven't tried it yet though. Let's see. Oh my goodness. I don't know how this is gonna work. My nose literally dips inside of my drink. Okay. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's good. It's like I'm in the Caribbean. It's about as hot as the Caribbean. Holy crap. And last and probably most important, thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful that you're spending this time with me. Like, I'm so blessed to call this my job. Like, who the fuck wakes up, puts on a fake nose, and tells a murder mystery, and calls that their career? Like, thank you. It's 10 a.m., I'm drinking. What more could anybody want? Anyways, babies, our story today starts in California on a kind of gloomy-ass January day. If you're from the Midwest, USA, January lasts about 9 months. But around midday, a police boat is slowly creeping through the fog, and the police inside of that boat were very doubtful about this mission. After all, this person they were looking for had been missing for like 30 freaking years. Who was this woman who mysteriously went missing? Why, a Miss Carol Jean Meyer, who had since become Carol Lubon by the night of her disappearance. Okay, I made a new drink. It's basically grape Kool-Aid with some vodka. We'll call it good. And Miss Thing kinda had to grow up really freaking quick. She got pregnant when she was 15, married the father Mike, and before she knew it, she was in her 20s with like 2 children and just had a craving to finally live life to its fullest. And at this point in her life, all of her college friends were going to parties and telling themselves that it's only gay if you swallow and just living their best lives, while Carol was attempting to do the same, but also had to take care of 2 kids. And since the kids kind of came first, she kind of had to stop going to classes. And she had matured into a pretty fun young woman that everyone would want to stay next to at parties. She'd tell you some funny ass shit. You just never knew what she'd say or do next. She had 2 sisters. Terry was younger, Gail was older, and they just adored Carol. They'd make each other laugh like they were best friends, which that is so precious. Let me know down in the comments below if you're friends with your siblings, if you have any. I've always envied those people who go on like sibling weekends. That must be so fun. Anywho, by the end of March in 1981, Carol's laughter was pretty much gone. Like, she was worn the fuck out. She felt that her life was like an overstretched condom on the verge of snapping, but we all know those little fuckers are basically indestructible, and Carol was like, you know what? So am I. She was tired of being a house mom, tired of being in her prime and feeling like she was ready to retire. She wanted to be somebody, make a change in the world, so she was like, I'm gonna go back to school. You go, Miss Carol, we love that journey for you. And so she did. She studied architecture and she was great at it. She was like, finally, this is my calling. And in a way, she was kind of lucky because she had already established a family life at home, so by the time she graduated, she could dive right into the workforce. In her mind, this was like almost perfect. Almost. When she had met her husband, he had been a very nice kid. He was popular, he was handsome, a high school football star, and he'd hang around her front porch like a little lost puppy. It was so cute. And her sisters just thought he was so damn cool, and it was even cooler when he'd bring all his football friends over to hang out. Oh, remember those days to be young, wild, and free of STDs? And when he got Carol pregnant, after the baby was born, Mike stepped his nips up and married her, which really meant a lot to her because he was a good dad and he loved her family. In fact, Mike kind of became like a son to Carol's father. They even hired him in on the family painting business. But this was common for Mike. Every group he entered, he was immediately loved, whether it was his friends, a new family, a new job. He was just this charismatic creature that everyone felt comfortable around. He was cute, funny, loyal, which I know does kind of describe a Labrador, but he was all that. He was everything except ambitious. He didn't mind having a low-key lifestyle, being a little bit cramped in a 2-bed, 1-bath house with the 4 of them. He just wasn't the type to look too far into the future and really think about what's gonna happen when the kids grow up. Like, where the fuck are the kids gonna sleep when they're too big for the bunk beds in the other room? And what about retirement? Like, everything isn't just bells, bubbles, and blowjobs, but that's really not how Mike saw things. In his eyes, everything was good, but then there's Carol, who is really wanting more. In her mind, it's almost like they were stuck in high school. Mike wasn't growing up, soon his mental age would match their children's age, and she was just gonna be raising 3 kids. And I think that really made this couple drift the fuck apart. Mike was over here living with rose-colored glasses, and Carol was over there dosing rose-smelling perfume on her breasticles. She was growing up, growing apart from Mike, and was doing a little sausage growing on the side, if you know what I mean. She was fucking other guys. It had been years of comfortable misery for Carol, you know, where you've accepted that your life isn't shit, but it's not great, it's just okay, and probably won't get any better. And after begging her husband to do something with his life to try and be the best he can be, she had no luck. And she checked her ass out of the relationship and was like, I need new dick. And that is when I come into the picture. No, I'm just kidding. But she does end up finding new D on the side without Mike knowing, and then she found another, and then another, and another, and before she knew it, she had more dicks than a phone book, and damn, she was happy. Mama bought herself a little red Audi Fox, aka her sex mobile. Anytime she was stressed, she'd take it out for a drive alone or get all tizzied up and go to the local meat market, the Red Onion, just for some dance jams and dry humping. Well, then comes along another nipply day in March, and Carol's son, Mike Jr., had just gotten a new stereo system for his 10th birthday, so he was in his bedroom listening to it with headphones. Probably those ones that had like the little wire that you put over your head and this black foam on the earpieces. Oh, good memories. My grandma got me a yellow pair to go with my Walkman. Anyways, while Nirvana was just rocking his world, Mike Jr. remembers seeing his mom walk angrily past the door. He could just feel that the air was thick with tension. His parents were having a fight, which was honestly something that the kids rarely ever saw happen. She was red hot like a fucking cigarette lighter. She marched her ass right down the hallway, walked out that front door, and though Mike Jr. couldn't hear what the argument was about, he could feel the entryway door bang to a close as she left. Ooh, mama was pissed. And when everyone woke up in the morning, things were back to normal. There was jazz playing, the sun was shining, and the table was filled with a 5-course breakfast. Just kidding, but that does sound lovely, doesn't it? And then the kids ignore it all, take a sip of juice, and leave to go to school. No, this was not like a low-budget Hallmark movie with a happy ending. Things were not back to normal. The house was cold, things were quiet, and Carol, she never came home. Mike Sr. said Carol had presented him with papers to sell the house so they could buy a bigger one, and he simply wouldn't have it. He was comfortable where he was in life, like why fuck with anything? I guess this caused a huge argument. Carol bolted, Mike went to bed, and when he woke up the next morning, his wife was still gone. Be looking under the bed and the closets. Honey, are you here? No? No? Okay. Although if I were looking for her with this thing, I'd be able to smell her 2 miles away. But Mike really didn't seem to give a rat's ass. He was not worried at all, and nor were Carol's sisters. They figured she just needed to get away. After all, she was working her ass to the bone, trying to become something, and was just wanting to make her family's life better. And after trying to strengthen the few strings left in her marriage, she just needed a little vacation. Well, a day goes by, which then turns into the weekend, which turns into a week, and now people are getting worried. They're like, where the fuck did she go? Mexico to enjoy the beach? San Diego for a little more sunshine? Well, when they find her car in the Red Onion's parking lot, dusty and obviously not used for several days, the family's like, hold the fuck up, something is seriously wrong. Mike, the kids, and Carol's sisters start looking around town for a sign of her, but with no luck. The kids are freaking out because their mom is missing, and the sister's like, did she finally get up, say sayonara, and create a new life? These sisters were pretty close. They would tell each other everything, so they did know about the troubles in the marriage, but they also knew that Mike was not an abusive person. He just had no will to become successful. So to Gail and Terry, for some reason, it just makes sense that she bolted and started a new life fresh. I mean, I personally think that's a little bit suspicious. Let's go back to this drink. Cheers to you. Oh, that's a good suspicious shot. Well, the week goes by and Carol's still gone. Mike would sit in bed alone and think about all the happy times they'd had together and just couldn't figure out why Carol would leave. He still believed that life was perfect for them and they should be happy and content right where they are. And while Carol was gone, he'd wake up in the morning or come back from the store and things would be ever so slightly moved, like a pile of clothes in their bedroom would be shifted or their mail sorted through, or a door he knew he left closed would be open. That's less suspicious and more scary. My first thought was would be that it's a sexy ghost with see-through but still obvious abs. Mike was a little bit more practical with his thinking, but he was like, Carol must be coming home, so I'ma just leave booby traps out. Like the clear piece of tape he'd stick on Carol's drawer, like he would take the kids out of town or to Universal Studios, and when they'd return home, the tape would be totally disturbed. And then a few weeks later, it seemed as though Carol's clothes were disappearing from their closet, money was being taken from their secret stash under the butter dish in the fridge. Things were going missing, just like Carol. And even more suspiciously, the family would get random ass phone calls on special days, like the holidays, the birthdays. It would ring, there'd be silence on the other end, but the family would always say, Carol, we love you, please come back, and then the call would just drop. How sad is that, but also still a little bit creepy. And definitely suspicious. And all while this was happening, Carol's sisters just assumed that she was trying to find a happy life somewhere. It didn't make the fact that she left her children behind excusable, but they understood that for the first time in a long time, she was probably living her life to the fullest wherever the fuck she was. I think they were secretly hoping she was sitting on some stripper's face in Vegas, but nobody knew. Time goes on, the kids play records that their mom used to play them. Mike marries again, he finds a 19-year-old gorgeous gal who everyone just welcomes into the family. And Carol's sisters were so damn happy for him. He was like their brother, and the fact that he was moving on after this shit show, they thought that was very commendable. There didn't seem to be any suspicious activity, so the police just marked this case as inactive. And I guess Carol's kids never had the sense of abandonment with her, but they always wished she'd show up to like Christmas or a soccer game, just come back and give a hug or say a quick hello, anything. Something inside of them just felt like she didn't exist anymore, so the family never really talked about her disappearance or her starting a new life or whatever the fuck this was. 6 freaking years go by since Carol's disappearance, and the police decide to just skim over the file again and revisit the case. And it's a good thing they did, because now Mike magically seemed to have a better memory of what happened the night Carol left. Before, he had said that they argued, she left, he went to bed alone, and he woke up alone. But now his ass is saying they argued, they went to bed together, she woke up at 5:30 to go tinkle, he drifted off back to sleep, and woke up to the sound of a car engine starting and driving away. The cops are like, memories change, they play games on us, it's really no biggie, so they put the case back in the freezer to get colder than Satan's soul. And Mike still remained close with Carol's family, they were like blood to him. He even ends up taking over the family painting business from Carol's father, and he and his young bride Carrie end up having 2 more sons. Gail and Terry start having children of their own, but now that Terry has kids, suddenly she saw her sister's disappearance in a completely new way. She now had the mother's love that was so similar to her sister's, and she was like, if you're unhappy, you'd leave your husband and take the kids, not leave everyone behind. So Terry began feeling very suspicious about her sister's disappearance, more like something had gone wrong versus Carol just upping her kitty and leaving. Yes, ma'am, Terry was taking suspicious shots left and right. Now, on the 15th anniversary of Carol's disappearance, the police knock on Mike's door again, but this time they scan the backyard, they use radar, they even dig up a few holes, but no luck. In their eyes, Carol was still gone, so this was just pointless, but they wanted to look like they were doing something. Nobody forgot about this. They featured an article in the local newspaper about Carol's mysterious disappearance and even had an interview with Mike. Except in this interview, he added that when Carol left, he could hear the garage door going up and down, something he just forgot to mention to the police, but it's a small detail, so who really cares? The years turn into decades, and suddenly there's a completely new millennium before this case is even reopened. A detective named Walt just happened upon this missing mother's file one day, and it made his spidey senses tingle. And I'm assuming it wasn't his UTI acting up either. He had been rummaging behind the big-ass pile behind his sergeant's desk and was like, ooh, what is this? He had never even heard of the case before and wondered if she was still even missing. So he read through the reports, noticing the slight changes to Mike's story over the years, and he thought, well, this is pretty fucking weird because this was such a traumatic event that you'd probably remember all of the details pretty clearly, especially if you'd been interviewed right after it happened when the situation was still fresh. So Walt takes a visit to Carol's parents' house, where in actual tears over the fact that this case is getting reopened. Unfortunately though, her dad did end up passing away like a month later, and when Terry saw Mike at the funeral, she had this feeling inside of her like she knew Mike had some kind of information about Carol that he was withholding. She couldn't even bring herself to approach Mike that day, but she wasn't the only one feeling a pull towards this case. Walt, who had a dozen important current files on his desk, had a gut feeling inside of him that Carol's disappearance was as peculiar as a pickle popsicle. For nearly 10 years, almost every day, he'd pull out that nasty little dusty file and read over it, trying to memorize every detail. He'd spoken with Carol's entire family, who all spoke very highly of Mike. He was their brother, their son, just as much family as Carol herself. So Walt finally brings himself to go pay Mike a visit to see which version of his wife's disappearance story he told. He definitely caught Mike a little off guard when he knocked on his door, but Mike was happy to let Walt in for a visit and stow his Lubriderm tissues. Mike was like, come on in, have a cup of instant coffee, I'll open up a pack of Nutter Butters. Walt starts interrogating Mike, and just like that, it seemed like Mike may have a few more details about that fateful night. Now he was saying that she had approached him with a real estate contract, which of course he said he wouldn't sign, which she apparently responded by saying that he makes her skin crawl, a line I've never told anyone. Might have to start using that though, I know a few people I could tell that to. And Walt's like, okay, keep going, and he's egging Mike on for a few more details, which oddly enough, he had. Interesting. Like the last time he saw Carol, apparently it wasn't at 10 p.m. when he went to bed, or at 5:30 when Carol got up to pee. It was before he went to bed, she was in the bathtub and he had to use the latrine. And then maybe around midnight or 1, he heard the garage door go up, and out the front window he saw Carol's car drive away. This was entirely different from the multiple accounts that he'd given before. Was he changing the story for theatrics? I mean, nobody is that dramatic. Well, remember that 007 James Bond trick that he tried with the tape on the dresser drawer? Now, he literally had no recollection of ever doing that. In fact, he said, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, I didn't do that. But he did say he'd take a little bit of baby powder and sprinkle it in front of the door to see if there were any footsteps. And then he'd also take a little piece of paper and put it on the door handle and see if it had fallen from somebody coming in. This dude was watching way too many secret agent movies. Well, now that his story had changed a little bit, people around the police station were starting to take notice of this case. So Walt gets his 2 co-workers, Jim and John, on board. John just happened to specialize in cracking tough nut cases and found it kind of strange that Mike's memory grew with details that didn't really matter but seemed to mysteriously forget details that did matter. Which, if you ever told a lie to someone, you often go on and on about shit that doesn't matter to try to hide the fact that you're guilty about something. I mean, yeah, the brain does play tricks and invent things, but John was like, the mind doesn't get sharper with details over time. If anything, you forget shit. Which I gotta say, I don't fully agree with, because I will literally be laying in bed and suddenly remember details about a room that I was in when I was like 2, and I'll remember things that were said years ago that I'd forgotten. Kind of like how you smell something and you're immediately brought back to when you used a urinal that one time at your great aunt's funeral 25 years ago. But anyways, adding too many details or changing the story up often is the sign of a lie, and so this was immediately a red flag for the team. Like, this was hella suspicious. Oh my gosh. The team was like, this guy probably killed her that night. He's gotten away with it for decades. She's not in Cabo or London living her best life. She's most likely a pile of bones now. But Mike was really trying to clear his name with the police. He even went in on his own free will to talk with the investigators like 2 or 3 more times. And then one day, they actually did have a break. John was sitting in the interrogation room with Mike, and Mike was like, you think that I killed her, don't you? And John responded by saying, well, we have a lot of cases where the husband finds out that the wife is cheating and he kills her. Then Mike responds and says, it had nothing to do with that. John is very taken aback. He's like, Aka, excuse me? It wasn't about that. It being what exactly? Mike says, look, just give me a few days to collect my thoughts. I'd be happy to cooperate when I come back. How about that? But when he came back, he gave them literally nothing. In fact, other than a few minor details now being changed again, they were no farther along in proving that this was even a murder. That is until Detective Jim heard about using a tool that just didn't exist when Carol went missing. And what might that be, folks? Social media. He had been homesick with the flu, and his wife was like, why don't you just start a Facebook page to find Carol? With the power of reach that it has, plus with everybody's devices listening to everyone's conversations, they were bound to find out if Carol was still out there and on the run. So he had an age progression artist make up-to-date photos of her, and Jim posted old and new pictures of her onto Facebook, onto Twitter, onto all the popular social media sites. And these social medias are connecting to people that Carol may have known, and so he reaches out and asks if anyone's seen her since she disappeared, with a resounding no. And even if she Googled her name, it would take you right to CarolJeanLuban.com, and who the fuck hasn't Googled themselves? Even if she was on the run, she'd know that there was a possible murder case going around her and could notify the police that I'm not dead. But still nothing, so the police are like, she's gotta be dead, or at least on a deserted island or something. But this was yet another piece to the puzzle that points towards her having been murdered. The cops were like, well, we could either ignore this, or we could take a huge ass risk and take Mike to court for the murder of his wife. So they arrest him and charge him with killing Carol. Everyone was horrified and confused. Carol's entire family couldn't believe how the police would think that Mike had anything to do with her disappearance, let alone her possible murder. This was a fucking nightmare on top of another nightmare for them. But at the same time, this is also a family who likes to keep their head in the sand. They were perfectly content thinking that Carol was just out somewhere, living like a rock star. It's almost like they replaced Carol with Mike, and even if he murdered her, it's easier to believe that she's somewhere out there still alive and keep him in the family rather than believe that he murdered her and lose both of them. And nobody adored Mike more than his own son, Mike Jr., but even even Junior had some reservations regarding his mom's case. Like when Mike's second wife, Carrie, divorced him, all Mike could do was talk about her. Every time Junior would come over, it was Carrie this, Carrie that, but never a word about Carol. At this point, the cops just want to close the fucking file. Like, this case has been around for 30 years. It was using so many freaking resources, and they could feel that the answers were just at their fingertips. The cops even told Mike, like, if you just tell us where the body is, we'll give you a deal for voluntary manslaughter, but he turned him down. This made detectives super nervous. Like, if they couldn't even convince Carol's own family that Mike was guilty, how would they convince a courtroom? But they went on with the court hearing nonetheless. The first task was to prove to the jury that with all of their social media outreach, they found absolutely nothing, which that in itself is kind of suspicious because like 9.5 out of 10 people have some form of social media. And with a whole 6 degrees of separation, surely someone in the world would have seen this woman over the last few decades, but nobody saw her. Like, that is actually kind of legit. That wasn't solid evidence, but it sure was strange as shit, right? Oh my gosh, I'm just realizing that I forgot my gloves. What the fuck? As for Carol's family, really all they had to go off of was what Mike told them. But even with Terry's suspicions of him, she still admitted to the jury that she thought of him as family. So did Gail, so did everyone. Nobody thought that he was even capable of doing this, except for one person, Mike Jr., his own son. He loved his dad with all of his heart, would take a fucking bullet for him, but under oath, he had to admit that he had a weird feeling about the whole situation, something he'd never told his father. Because not once did his mom ever give the impression that she wanted to leave them. She adored her kids. So when asked by the court, do you think your dad had anything to do with this? He said, I'm not certain. And when they asked Junior if he thought his dad should face some kind of punishment if he did murder Carol, he said no. Which, that's kind of weird, isn't it? This is what I'm saying, where it's like they replaced Carol with Mike. Clearly, this case wasn't looking too spicy for the detectives, but in the end, it's not the courtroom's responsibility to convince the family. It's their job to prove that what they're saying Mike did actually happened. There were no witnesses, there was no body, there was no evidence, so really all they had to go off of was Mike's story while in stand. And surely, since he's told it so many goddamn times, he would have the exact same story as 30 years ago. Yeah, right, okay. No, madam. Even under oath, his story has changed yet again. Like when he added that she was in the bathtub when she said, you make my skin crawl. The detectives in the courtroom are like, now hold the fuck up. You told us that when she approached you with the realty papers and you declined, that was when she said that you make her skin crawl. Which is it, mister? It can't be both. And he'd also said that he found out Carol had left because he went out in the garage and the garage door was wide open and the car was gone. What the fuck happened to the story where 1, she just up and left in the middle of the night after Mike had to pee, and 2, the story of him hearing the garage door open and seeing her drive away? Every time he's asked, it's a different freaking story. Why would there be different versions of what actually happened? He either saw her in the driveway or he didn't. It's not that fucking hard, man. Make up your damn tits, dude. Now on stand, Mike said he never even heard the garage door opening. He doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about, but he says he would lay in bed so many nights and replay what happened in his head, and his mind would make the story change. So I guess that's an excuse? I don't know. But he does suddenly remember walking out of the open garage door and seeing the car's taillights drive away into the night, not knowing if this will be the last time he'll ever see her. He thought, well, maybe she's just gonna go clubbing again and stay at a gal pal's house. When questioned on the stand, it's like he doesn't remember much of anything. He doesn't remember when he went to bed. He doesn't remember the garage door opening. He doesn't even remember the last time he saw his wife. Don't you think the last time you ever saw your significant other, you would remember that? But oddly enough, he had no clue. Despite having told cops several different stories on camera, he now simply seemed to have forgotten that she ever existed. I'm sorry, but we have to call a suspicious shot for this one. I need a fucking barrel-sized glass for that bullshit. But even so, the prosecutor's like, you killed her, didn't you? You drowned her in the bathtub at your home, you disposed of her body, and now we're here. And Mike is like, no, and he actually sounded and looked sincere. He's like, I'm an honest man. I would have admitted if I had hurt her. The jury didn't buy his story, though. Even with absolutely no physical evidence, they found him guilty of murdering Carol. So off to jail he goes to await his official murder trial. That day comes and Junior takes the stand and tells the courtroom what an amazing guy his dad is, and that he totally respects and understands the court's final decision, but he was requesting leniency towards the ruling. Even Derry got on the stand and requested that Mike receive a lesser sentence, hoping that maybe he would tell the truth if he didn't face life in prison. So the prosecutor stands up and says, for fuck's sake, Mike, for your family, for your kids, I will give you one more chance to tell the truth. Just be free, let it go, and tell us what really happened. Mike asks to excuse himself from the courtroom, and they decide to stop the trial and continue a month later. For weeks hippity hop on by, Mike doesn't doesn't end up getting any deals, but the trial still resumes. However, shocker, Mike has a totally different story. But this time, he didn't utter a single word to the courtroom. His lawyer told the judge exactly what happened. According to him, some versions of what Mike had said were a little bit true. The argument about selling the house, her taking a bath, even her leaving after midnight. But then he says she came back in the middle of the night and announced that she was taking another man who was not Mike to her sister Terry's wedding. Well, obviously this made Mike a little bit upset, and she was trying to comfort him, give him a hug, saying, "Oh, you'll find someone who loves you," and that was the last thing that she ever said. He didn't want to hear it, so he pushed her off of him. She stumbled, hit her head on the edge of the coffee table in the living room, and that was that. There was no blood, he said, but he knew immediately that she was dead. But again, his shit was literally changing by the minute, so when his lawyer initially heard the story, they hook him up to a polygraph test, which the lawyer explains to the courtroom, he failed. It's like his whole life was a sham and his nose was growing with every lie that he told. So then he admits that she actually didn't trip. He punched her in the head once and it was so hard that it killed her. Then he dragged her body out to the garage, wrapped it up in a bundle of old carpeting, took the car, parked it at the Red Onion. Then when he came back, he put her body in his trunk, went out to the ocean, found a paddle boat, paddled out to sea, and dumped her body with a cinder block attached to her. That sounds like a lot of fucking work, but most of all, can you imagine how horrific that must be for the children to be hearing this? Not just the children, the entire family in like the fucking courtroom. This was a huge shock. For all of these decades, they had believed Mike. They had defended him. They had seen how sweet he was, how kind and generous, and how fantastic of a father he'd been. But suddenly, here was this monster that allegedly murdered Carol. The family wasn't even sure if they believed him on this one. They thought maybe he'd given into the court's pressure just to get it fucking over with. So now, some 30 years later, Mike and a swimming crew were on a boat in the middle of a gray, chilly day. They were just hoping to find remnants of Carol or even the cinder block that he'd tied to her. The team pulls up their radars, scanning the ocean floor, even diving down to take a peek for themselves, only to come up empty-handed. And the police are like, "Motherfucker, I think we've been swindled again. Did anybody think to give Mike another polygraph test before we hauled our asses out into the middle of the damn ocean?" Everyone looks around and was like, well, no, we had an admission and that was good enough for us. So they wire him up again and strap him to the polygraph test, only to find that once again, he was lying. Like holy shit covered sherbet. Well then, after long last, he finally breaks down. He says, "Okay, I will tell you about the place that I buried her," and this time, he passed the freaking test. So a team goes out into the open field where Mike says Carol's remains are buried. And not to be like sickly romantic, but it's almost like even in death, he still loved her. He wanted her body to be in a peaceful location rather than just disposing of her on the bottom of the ocean, which is kind of sweetly dark and twisted. It's like the end of a knockoff Tim Burton movie. Mike ends up getting 15 years to life. The family still loves him, but they're trying to process exactly what happened. Mike and Carol had been childhood sweethearts, had grown up together, but Mike had spent more time trying to cover up her murder than he actually spent knowing and living with Carol. While in prison, Junior asks his dad to just write one sentence about his mom every week so that he's thinking of her and so that Junior can just learn a little bit more about her. And what's weird is that Carol's family, specifically her mom, doesn't really believe Mike's story. She's grateful for the closure and to know that her daughter didn't just up and abandon her kids, but she doesn't think that what Mike said happened actually happened. Denial ain't just the name of a river in Africa, honey. I don't know if she thought maybe it really was an accident. Carol actually did trip and Mike was just taking the blame. I'm not certain. But Mike is nearing his 70s now and still locked up. He requested an appeal like 10 years ago, but it was denied. But the weirdest part of this story, though, no body has actually been recovered yet. So with no physical evidence, how is this man still locked up? I mean, there is his confession and of course the polygraph tests, but I just don't understand how they haven't found a single bone or shred of DNA where Mike says he dumped her. But what an odd story, right? The emotions that these kids must have gone through, like, woof. There's a lot of denial, a lot of weird forgiveness. It's just a very odd situation. But please let me know down in the comments below if there's anything that I didn't add to the story. I always love hearing little juicy tidbits from you. Otherwise, babies, there you go. Again, thank you so much for being here. From the bottom of my little puppet heart, I love having you. And you know my little spiel. If you'd like a little bit more Nady in your life, please head over to my Patreon. It's patreon.com/poplux. You get videos a day early, you get Patreon-only content, and best part, art. It is cheap, fun, and fancy, just like me. And like always, please be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell down below so that you're notified anytime I upload a new video. Don't forget my newest collection of highlighters, including Black Ice, which does change from black to white, will be available again soon at thepopluxe.com. Also, my latest album, Kiss of Fame, is available everywhere online that music is sold. Thank you so much to everyone who's supporting them. Comment down below, let me know what you thought of this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. You can follow me on Snapchat, Instagram, and Twitter at officialnady, and you can follow me online at thepopluxe.com. Thank you so much for watching. I love you all, and I will see you again soon. Bye!